However, what I learned today was that the clubs that triggered this were a raft or a group of championship clubs. And clearly, there was talk of the main kind of agenda being reducing the top flight from 12 teams to 10. Well, the clubs that are pushing for this and that have actually triggered the sort of debate, they're looking for an expanded Premier League or Premiership. And on top of all that, just shortly before we came on the show, St Johnstone chairman Adam Webb has come out, and as we discussed last night, you need 11 Premier League clubs, Premiership clubs, to vote for. So if you wanted to go to a top 10, you need 11 out of the 12 to back that. Adam Webb has already come out and said St Johnstone will vote against it and would look for an increased top flight. So going entirely the opposite direction. He says it would be a stupid thing for Scottish football to do. We need to try and aim to be more like the English Premier League. And if we don't have 20 clubs that are ready to make a Premier League, then let's go to 14, 16, whatever, and edge your way there. So that's already the first one to stick his head above the parapet has said he'll be voting against. So you would need now the rest of the top flight, all 11 top flight clubs, to vote in favour of a 10 for it to get off the ground, and it ain't going to happen. So effectively, that one's dead. We will now go through a procedure of people arguing why it should be 14s, 16s, whatever. But I think, as we kind of said last night, Daniel, that requires a consensus. You've already seen on day one the consensus isn't there for the 10. I doubt very much it's going to be there for the 14 or 16 either.
John writes in saying turkeys aren't going to vote for Christmas, Scott.
Exactly right.
Jacko, who would actually want a 10 then? I mean, is it purely the bigger clubs and purely just to get a bigger chunk of the cash being divvied up? I mean, is that the only for it?
I'm not sure, Scott. I mean, I do know, obviously, there's a lot of talk of fixture congestion. And so the bigger clubs, and they haven't asked for this. It's maybe been their response to, a move by championship clubs to try and increase it. They've maybe went the other way and said, no, well, let's have a look at decreasing it to a 10. It would mean instead of 38 games, 36 games. Reduces it by 2.
Aye.
I mean, there is an argument, Scott, and the argument that, for people that would be pro going to a 10 would be, well, you're taking 12, you're getting rid of the 2 kind of lesser teams of the 12 to get to 10, increases the quality, they would argue. So instead of, and certainly the argument against a 16 or whatever would be, do people want Celtic versus Dunfermline, or do they want Celtic versus Hearts and Celtic versus Aberdeen and Celtic versus Hibs? And even though people might say, because I think there is an element now after 25 years of the top 12 and the split, there is maybe an argument out there that people want something fresh, something different. But I think they'd soon get bored of that as well.
Yeah.
So as I said, look, that's it. It's fallen at the first hurdle in terms of getting for a 10. We'll wait to see if what the discussions look like around 14 and 16. But as I said last night, there's too many pitfalls to that. There'll be too many objections. You're just not going to get consensus. If you think about it, the last time that we tried to do this and find a consensus was at Scottish football's biggest point of crisis. Yep. COVID had hit. The leagues had to be called before they were finalised. Teams were getting relegated without the fairness of and the equity of having a full campaign. And at that moment in time, it could not be more unfair. And so that you would have thought there would have been a willingness, and it might be possible to find a consensus to save the likes of your Dundee Uniteds and all the unfairness and Partick Thistles and all that stuff. It wasn't achievable then. There's no way it's achievable today. And as I said, the kind of the initial things seem to be pointing towards, the 10, the top 10, and reducing it rather than expanding it. It's 99.9% dead in the water. It's not something we're going to have to waste a great deal of time talking about. I'm sure we will, though. I'm sure we'll be talking about it for weeks. I'm sure that on April 29th, when the competitions working group gets together, there'll be a reason for everybody to have an argument about stuff. But at the end of the day, we're not going to find the consensus required, which is 11 out of 12 in the top flight, and then basically 75% from the Premiership and the Championship, and then 75% across all 4 divisions. That's not achievable, Manfred, because everybody comes to this argument with their own priorities and their own self-interest, and they can't see beyond it. So that's why people might want change, but I would. My guess right now is 90% not a chance, probably even higher than that, and it's certainly not going to be the top 10.
I totally agree with you. I mean, in terms of getting the consensus, you're probably right. It's a shame though, because you would like to see a proper conversation. Just obviously with this kind of making the headlines the last couple of days, people's been talking about it, and you see the different ideas. And I mean, when I kind of had a look at it today, I mean, I think the 14 would be good if they could get to that
14
point.
with a 6 and 8 split, Scott.
Yeah, I quite like that.
You don't feel that's horribly? I mean, if the complaint is about the top 12 in its current form, is that it's a bit manipulated, it's a bit, difficult to understand the split, and how team in 7th can finish with more points than the team in 6th, and
I don't. Do we get much of that now, though? I mean, I feel as if that was the case maybe at the start. I don't feel as if you get that many complaints. No, I think everybody pretty much.
So why change it then? What's the advantage in changing it to 14 and an even more complicated split?
I'm no dead against. I'm no dead for changing it. I just think if you were going to change it, as you say, if you did want to freshen it up, you obviously the big caveat here is you need to still have the 4 Old Firm games, not to get any sort of TV deal. You need the 4 Old Firm games. I just think the 14. It wouldn't be perfect. I don't think any system would be in Scottish football. But the 14, when I looked at the kind of pros and cons, the 8 and the 6, you still get the 4 derby games. Potentially one more relegation place, potentially a playoff for a European place. I think it would bring something.
And what do you have? Do you have a top 8 or a top 6?
I think the one I looked at was a top 6 and then a bottom 8. Then you can have a kind of playoff in the middle for the last European spot. Then
wouldn't fancy being clubs 7 and 8.
Getting into the bottom 8.
Yeah, with nothing to play for. And by the way, Scott, to make that split happen, I think it's 26 games. So you're deciding who's the top 6 after 26 games.
Right.
Rather than at least, as things stand just now, 33.
33 games.
I think it's fairer surely to do it over 33 games before you tell people, well, this is what you're fighting for the rest of the season.
Probably. I do think there'll be a bit of excitement about it though. The kind of new format. I think if there's a European playoff place, as I say, 3 relegations, so there's more jeopardy. Whether obviously smaller clubs would want that, probably not. But I just think, as I say, I'm not totally for change. I don't think there's that many issues with the way it is just now. But I think if you were going to change it, Adam Webb touched on it there. I think if you're keen on expanding the league, 14 is clearly the next step. And you see how that works, and then maybe further down the line, that might be 5, 6, 7 years down the line, you can look at it again, see if it's working. Do you bring it back, or do you even try and expand it again? I just think that I definitely think there's enough clubs, enough proper big clubs in the Championship to get another two in there. I think it'd bring a bit of variety, just a bit of freshness to it. But as I say, I've not got a major issue with the way
Scott, I've got to tell you, mate, that does sound very much like change for change's sake.
Well, but that's what clearly somebody in there wants change.
The Championship clubs want change because they want a bigger Premier League, because they want to increase their chances of playing in it.
Of course. And listen, you can understand that if you're a Partick Thistle or a Dunfermline or a Falkirk or whatever, then obviously you would want a better crack at it, because let's face it, Jacko, I mean, we're talking about the flaws in the current system. I mean, one of them is the playoffs, because it's so heavily weighted against Championship. It's not impossible.
It's really unfair.
Yeah, that's really. That's demoralising for clubs, I think. No, because you want that Championship's a decent league. No, I think for the last few years it's been pretty competitive. But if you're in it and you're thinking we've next to no chance of getting up here, then I think that has to be tweaked in some way. As I say, I'm not saying I've got all the answers, but I think that could be tweaked to make it a bit better.
Let me hit you guys with some comments on this before we move on. Sijad writes in saying, always thought Scotland had massive potential to be the best outside the top 5 Euro leagues. Ease off some of the rules to make it more attractive to interesting buyers like the 49ers. There's at least 6 decent stadiums and can build more because fan attendance to population ratio is one of the highest in Europe, so definitely a football mad country. The infrastructure is there, literally next door to the EPL, so it can attract tourist visitors. If there are more high profile players in the SPL, but like death and taxes, there are always numpties in charge at the SFA. This one as well from...
You can't blame the SFA for this one. This is entirely an SPFL matter.
Aye. Scotland the Brave says, have to say, guys, I prefer the split and enjoy it. It was made for the best 6 teams to go ahead and could be a potential swing the title. However, Celtic dominance has beat that regardless. He says, I know that if Rangers had a 5-point lead come the split, there's still a great chance Celtic win the league, as Celtic can take care of the rest better. Keep the split. Rebel says, split the difference, make it 13 teams. And Marzuno points out what you were saying, Scott, the SPFL clubs would have to vote for less Old Firm visits and an expanded league. That's another huge financial hit